feel like we're physically connected in some way. So before we kick off, I want to take a moment and introduce Jeannie Freeman, who is on with us. Jeannie is our co-host for the conference. She is the Director of Operations and Finance at Mito Action, and she's always working so hard behind the scenes, so it's really great for everybody to get an option to see her and say hello. So welcome, Jeannie. We're glad you are here with us. So just a few housekeeping things. So we're going to take questions at the end of the session. So feel free to enter all of your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom meeting screen, and we will do our best to get through as many as we possibly can. There will also be a quick poll during this presentation. You will see it pop up on your screen when it's time, and we'll give you just a minute or two to provide your response, and then we'll continue with the presentation. So just wanted everyone to be aware of that. So here we go. As we all try to navigate what has become an ever-changing landscape due to COVID-19, each and every day, we're all grappling with decisions how to protect the health and well-being of our families. Information changes day to day and sometimes hour to hour. We want to make sure as you're facing some of these difficult situations due to COVID-19, you have the necessary resources to support you and your family. We are honored to have with us special needs attorney Annette Hines. Annette is the founding partner of Special Needs Law Group of Massachusetts and has been practicing in the areas of special needs, elder law, and estate planning for over 20 years. Her clients include individuals and families of children with special needs, the elderly, and others in the community. She received her BA from the University of Vermont, her BA from Suffolk University, and her JD from Howard University School of Law. Ms. Hines brings personal experience with special needs to her practice as the mother of 2 daughters, one of whom passed away from mitochondrial disease in November 2013. This deep personal understanding of special needs fuels her passion for quality special needs planning and drives her dedication to the practice. In April of 2019, she published Butterflies and Second Chances, a beautiful memoir about her life raising her disabled daughter, which was an Amazon bestseller, so be sure to go on and check it out. Recognized as a distinguished citizen by ARC Massachusetts and cited for public service by both the Massachusetts State Senate and House of Representatives, Ms. Hines works tirelessly on behalf of people with disabilities. She is a member of the Mito Action Marcel's Way Family Fund Committee and was designated a 2016 Top Women of Law from Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. She has been designated a Massachusetts super lawyer every year since 2014. So please join me in welcoming our own super lawyer, Annette Hines.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm gonna turn off this slide now as I get used to what it is like to traverse this wonderful world of Zoom. I appreciate all of you having me here today. I am really so glad to be with all of you, and how meaningful to join all of you during the 30th anniversary week of the ADA. As Kyra said, my name is Annette Hines, and I am an attorney and an advocate and a business owner, and most importantly, a mom of 2 beautiful daughters, Elizabeth and Caroline. And my youngest, Caroline, is 19 years old now and fabulous. And I don't talk about her too much, frankly, because she just doesn't like it when I do. But I will tell you a little bit about her later in this talk, because some of the things that Caroline and I have done throughout her childhood and my raising of my daughters is significant to what I want to talk to you about today. It is my daughter Elizabeth, though, that really brings me to be with you here today. And Elizabeth was born a 29-week, 2-pound preemie. Elizabeth was the love of my life. And yes, I say was, because as Kyra mentioned, 6 years ago, we lost Elizabeth to her disease. She was diagnosed at 2.5 years old with mito, FAOD, and a host of other issues as well. And before I started our talk today, I mentioned to Jeannie that I had never met another FAOD family during our time of raising Elizabeth. Isn't that something? These kinds of conferences actually bring people together in a way that before technology like this and before being able to come together electronically, it would have been so hard for me to get out to a conference when raising such a fragile child like Elizabeth. So bravo for us being able to get together in this way. Such a great accommodation, being able to get together. I was so disappointed initially when I found out that we weren't going to be meeting in Pittsburgh, but now I'm cheering that we actually can get together virtually like this, because I think as I'm thinking about it, it offers an opportunity for families like mine that maybe would not have been able to participate. So I know that it sounds strange to say that your child was the love of your life, but truly Elizabeth was, because even though she was profoundly intellectually disabled, blind, and wheelchair bound and nonverbal, she really lit up my world, and her smile lit up the world. She and I had a bond that went beyond words, and I'm truly honored to be here today speaking with you about what comes next. These past 4 months have been difficult on all of us, but perhaps none have been hit harder than the rare disease community. However, I want to say that this pandemic has given us a unique opportunity to look at our educational system for all children with fresh eyes, but particularly for our children with special needs. Together, we have learned so much. Let's put all our preconceived notions aside about education and wipe the slate clean. Let's start fresh. Let's also look at our adult services system as well while we're at it. I want to say that I'm not a clinician. I'm not an expert on education, and I don't pretend to have all the answers for you today. But what I am is a coalition builder, and I'm hoping to inspire you a little bit today to join me. Today, I'm going to talk to you about choice and voice. First, let's have a quick review of a few things that are happening around the country. By late March, all schools around the country were closed, and children had been moved to some form of online schooling or distance learning. More about that later. Families were forced to choose whether they wanted to bring their residential students and adults with disabilities home for the duration of the pandemic, however long that might be, or they weren't going to be able to see them and spend time with them. Parents predominantly, I believe most polls had this well over 90% women, were struggling with managing the education and care of their children, along with working from home or at an essential job, and the care of their other family members in their home as well. The epidemic raged on, starting in the Northeast and then sweeping through the country. And by June, it began to be crushing. And folks questioned what the next steps would be to reopen the country. Many school districts struggle to deliver educational services to special needs children, particularly the most challenged children, children with low incidence or multiple disabilities, children with complex behavioral plans, our children. Yet we also heard from families that some children were thriving at home too. Children who were doing better in quieter environments, children who were doing better one-to-one with their parents. School districts were asking families across the country, for example, New Jersey, Illinois, Massachusetts, to sign away their due process rights or allow them to suspend certain services under their IEPs. That's an individualized education plan, if you don't know what that acronym means. Those services that couldn't be delivered virtually. For example, here in Massachusetts, more than 12 school districts, at least the ones we were able to catch, had presented waivers to families to sign that allowed the districts to violate federal IDEA timelines for team meetings. IDEA is the federal law that prescribes our educational system and our educational guidelines and protections for students. Those timelines for team meetings, evaluations of students, and implementing the education plan known as the IEP. Upon hearing this in May, the Federal Department of Education clarified for the states that no school districts should be asking families to sign such waivers of rights. Even still, many families throughout these months have seen de facto violations of their children's IEPs because delivering the services on those IEPs via online services is a near impossibility. What do I mean by that? I mean that trying to deliver certain services like physical therapy, vision services, occupational therapy, speech and language services, behavior plans, became extremely difficult, if not impossible, to be delivered by a parent or to be delivered at the same frequency for a 6-hour day online. Given this, many families are considering lawsuits or have started lawsuits against their school districts for denial of FAPE, a free and appropriate education for their children. This is the guarantee that our federal government has made to us, and frankly, what our tax dollars have paid for. Class action lawsuits are being discussed and sought, and one has been filed in New York City already that is claiming plaintiffs in 20 states and growing. At the same time, school districts have approached their state and federal government to request relief from liability for lawsuits related to the virus on all sorts of levels, from children and adults contracting it on their premises, to failure to deliver services properly under IEPs, and so on. This is anticipation on their part that they think that these lawsuits are just coming on their way in waves, and they're not wrong. These waivers vary state by state, and as of right now, school districts have not been issued any waivers from the federal government under IDEA or any other laws yet. However, teachers all over the country are scared to return to work. A lawsuit was filed in Florida against Governor DeSantis just last week, arguing that there is no safe way to open the schools. Teachers unions representing their members in other large cities in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, California, and many, many other states are also balking at the plans that cities and towns have come up with regarding the return to the classroom, and are staging various forms of protests regarding the same. And parents are also fearful about returning children to school as well. School districts have variable plans about how they will be or won't be reopening their schools. And everyone's comfort level is in flux. Families are making plans about what is next for their children. Homeschooling, distance learning, online school with their district, it's all very confusing. And everybody is unsure what's going to fit for them. As a response, some families are forming education pods. This is a small cluster of homeschooling or distance learning families that have grouped together to hire a teacher or tutor and a curriculum by pooling their resources. This keeps the exposure to a minimum for a group of kids and their families, as well as the educator that they have decided to hire. We can discuss the pros and cons of this approach later on in the program. Pods are very much like homeschooling co-ops of the past before the pandemic. I've realized through this pandemic that there is a lot of confusion over the difference between homeschooling and distance learning. So I thought it would be very valuable to discuss those differences so that families can make an informed choice going forward, and then be a strong and loud advocate when it's time to make their voice heard. Back when my children were little, homeschooling was still a bit more radical than it is today, given the current pandemic. For those of you who don't know me very well, I was raising 2 daughters mostly alone after an early divorce. Elizabeth, being profoundly disabled, as I've described to you, was mostly wheelchair-bound, intellectually impaired, and nonverbal, and her mito was degenerative. So every year, things got a little bit more complicated for her. As a 29-week preemie, she was also very, very medically fragile. We had nursing care at home and a lot of hospital stays. We spent a lot of time in and out of the house, and things just seemed to go from one crisis to the next. But she was also very funny, very sweet. She loved butterflies, and her mito was, could really be described as life-limiting. Then there was Caroline. Caroline was younger than Elizabeth by 4 years. And again, I don't talk about her or write about her too much because, again, she really, really doesn't like it. But I'm going to talk about her now. Caroline was a beautiful but very intense child, as many special needs siblings can be. She was also very funny and artistic and loved to make movies and sing songs. But when Caroline was younger, she struggled enormously. She was always that kid in the corner playing with something else while all the other kids were listening to a story on the story mat. Our home life was very busy and tragic, and there were a lot of people in and out. Caroline had a lot of different caregivers, and she lacked consistency in her life and seemed to go from one crisis to the next. And I just couldn't seem to slow the pace of our life down. Many of you single moms out there, maybe even moms who have good partners, are just nodding your heads right now because you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying is truth. But then there was dance, and it was her thing, and she was pretty good at it. She wasn't the best in the group, and as usual, she was awkwardly struggling to make friends. But she found her way to the middle of the pack, and I thought this would be okay. Elizabeth was getting more medically complex just as we were getting more involved in this dance community, and Caroline was approaching her early tween years. And we were learning that some in the group were homeschoolers. This sounded like a great idea to us at the time, so we dove into the deep end to learn more about it. Caroline was in a group of homeschoolers who were homeschooled because they were training in the arts or sports. This would include dance, actors, athletes like Olympians. Have you ever wondered how those 15-year-old gymnasts or skaters train all day, or how those little kids can be in a musical like School of Rock on Broadway? And homeschooling is how they do it. But actually, I was finding out that there is a big difference in homeschooling techniques, which has a lot to do with what is going on today during this pandemic. homeschooling and distance learning are two very different things. Homeschooling involves the caregivers or parental lesson plans, and distance learning is still a school or teacher and tutor-led approved curriculum that is facilitated on a distance learning platform. Our old correspondence-style coursework of the past now made more possible by computers and many different learning platforms. There were not many homeschooling or distance learning programs to choose from back then. I'm dating myself a little bit. We opted for distance learning and used an approved curriculum that was actually affiliated with a public school in our state because that made it free. Most of the other programs came with hefty price tags, which we could not afford. Those price tags would be anywhere from $5,000 to like $10,000, $12,000. I mean, the cost of college back then. And for me, on the budget I was on as a single parent, there was just no way. Also, a lot of our friends were doing full homeschooling, and I just did not have that kind of time. With Elizabeth being as challenged as she was and trying to juggle all of the home care nursing and the in and out of the hospital with Elizabeth, and I was trying to work and honestly just trying not to lose my mind, which was a daily struggle, I was not going to try to be Caroline's full-time teacher and make up a curriculum for her. That's not to say that that is not the right thing for other people, and no judgment here, but for me, it was not going to work. So distance learning fit the bill, and doing a public school distance learning program was the right thing for us at the time. So just wanting to explain that and kind of set the stage. So our choice was called K-12, and this is not an advertisement for their program, although it was not too well known back then. I do see them advertising all over the place now. This gave Caroline access to an online classroom, a free computer, free books and materials as if she were in a public school, because after all, my tax dollars were actually paying for it anyway. And also a classroom teacher, a certified public school classroom teacher. I mean, this actually, they sent us a microscope and little rocks to look at, and notebooks and all her books and every single thing we needed, art paper and clay, modeling clay, everything came that we needed as if she were in a public school classroom. Back then, they didn't have laptops. They actually sent us this big clunky desktop computer. It was kind of funny. But we got everything that we needed. She logged on for like 2 hours a day, and it was around her dance schedule. And they were even very flexible with us when Elizabeth was in the hospital and Caroline couldn't get on for a couple of, a week or even a couple of days in a row. And although she was in a public school program and it was distance learning, there was a lot more flexibility around that. And that's why it is very different than online school with your actual public school that you are connected to right now. The flexibility is very important because Caroline raced ahead in math and got done with her math curriculum in, 5 months or something. I mean, she was done in half a year, but struggled and didn't finish, only got through about 75% of her history and her English curriculum because she was a slow reader. So, there's a lot of leeway when you're doing distance learning as opposed to actually having to be part of your local public school. So that's something that I want to really be clear about. So the most important thing was that I was her facilitator and I got to spend time with her. I got to see where her strengths were and where she was challenged. That was key. My fondest memory of working together with her was when we worked on a history project together about the Trail of Tears. We built a board game together about the perils of the road west because she was a visual learner like me. we had a lot of flexibility about how we wanted to learn and do the lessons. They weren't scripted to us. They were really, we had lessons, but we could do the lessons in the way that we wanted to. And we just needed to understand the curriculum and be able to take the tests at the end. In Massachusetts, we have standardized testing. Because it was a public school, we still had to do our MCAS testing. But, again, for Caroline, who's a visual learner, instead of having to just, do busy work, we built this model game to understand this Road West. So Caroline is part Cherokee Indian on her dad's side. It was pretty cool to understand what her grandma went through, her grandma's family. It was really interesting and cool. So anyway, another thing about this whole homeschooling versus distance learning, with Elizabeth's complexity, I never would have tried. I never would have felt adequate to be able to try to teach Elizabeth at home in a homeschooling program. I would have felt completely incapable of doing that. Just FYI. And that's not to say that all of you would make that same choice and would feel the way that I did, but I felt completely incapable and inadequate to do that. So that brings me to my next point about special needs. So Caroline was on her computer joining her class for about an hour or two each day around her dance schedule, and the rest of the time was done on her own. The teacher was grading her work that we turned in, and that is essentially what is happening today. Caroline's learning challenges became very clear to me during that time. I didn't know that she was having those problems at school. Nobody was telling me. I've heard from so many of you during this time of the pandemic as well, that one of the best things to come out of all of this crisis is the closeness you have with your children. Being able to participate in those lessons with your children and their educators, you see what they can do, what they cannot do. You can see how to present materials to your blind students, how to stretch your child for physical therapy, how to break up a lesson plan for someone with executive function challenges. Maybe you're even recording these Zoom sessions to use later at your IEP meetings, you smart cookies, you. And, God help those team facilitators who are going to tell you that your child does not need XYZ later when you go to sit down at those team meetings, because they're not going to be able to tell you now that your child does not need XYZ, because you've seen it. You see what your child needs. You see how well they're doing, how well they're not doing, and you've been doing hand over hand with them and so forth. So this is going to be interesting as we go forward. Some of you are finding that your children are not making progress at home, and that is okay too. It's all information that is useful and helps us know what will work in the future. No distance learning or homeschooling program for your son or daughter, or at least it must be designed very differently than what is being presented right now. Pods are probably not going to work for the more profoundly impaired children. They are probably not going to work for families with limited means. And they pose a real threat to pull talented teachers, therapists, and other ancillary educators away from school systems to private people who can pay on a much larger scale than before, because those folks are concerned for their health and well-being, which will become an overriding factor as opposed to their original mission-based life. Tragically, many educators and the general public looked down on homeschooling due to cultural bias, stereotyping, misinformation, and a lack of understanding about concepts and outcomes. And just before the pandemic hit, Harvard Law School announced an event to discuss homeschooling. I quote, "The focus will be on problems of educational deprivation and child maltreatment that too often occur under the guise of homeschooling," unquote. I myself had many discussions with friends and family alike, as well as my school system, about educating Caroline, my youngest daughter. There is a strong bias that homeschoolers are inferior, do not learn basic skills, and are indoctrinated with scary ideologies in the backwoods of America. I kid you not, the articles are out there. For example, by Harvard law professor Elizabeth Bartholet, who quite literally equates homeschooling with child abuse. And you only need to read Tara Westover's best-selling memoir to be convinced of it. But what would they think now during COVID when there are no good options and basically everybody is homeschooling? It is important to understand your rights as parents, which are complicated. All 50 states recognize the rights of parents to homeschool their children. And although there isn't exact constitutional right to homeschool, there are protections for parents under the 1st, 9th, and 10th Amendments of the Constitution. There are several Supreme Court and Court of Appeals cases that deal with this subject, recognizing parents' rights to educate their children at home. Here are only a few things to consider as you are developing your plan. 1, as the parent or caregiver, do you have the ability, desire, and time to create your own curriculum for your child? Be honest. There is no judgment here. You just need to figure this out. And you don't need to have the answer immediately. You just need to start thinking about it. 2, as the parent or caregiver, do you require any special training that you don't yet have to teach or care for your child? I certainly did not feel up to the task when it came to Elizabeth and all of her multiple special needs. On the other hand, I really felt up to the challenge to work with Caroline and her executive function challenges. 3, has your child responded well to less social stimuli at home? Some people are saying a big resounding yes. 4, on the other hand, has your child regressed without their peers? Some people are a big resounding yes to that. 5, does your child have a low incidence disability such as blindness or deafness or something else? 6, does your child require any special equipment that you can only get at school, such as a vision room or a standing frame or something else? 7, very important, does your child have a medical condition that will make it too risky to return to a classroom without a vaccine or herd immunity? This is something that I have been thinking a lot about, and I know we're going to be talking a lot about these next 3 days. If Elizabeth were here with us today, I know I wouldn't be returning her to school as much as she would want to go. It would just be too challenging to think about trying to keep her safe with all of her fragility. What is your list? You will have other things that need to go on that list for considerations. The bottom line is this: if you are not comfortable with how things are set up for your child in school, you have options. Your child is still entitled to a free and appropriate education under IDEA. That includes, under some circumstances, homeschooling and distance learning. But it also includes protections and accommodations under the ADA and numerous other state laws as well. Under our current situation, your team is somewhat fractured, and more than ever, you are the hub and the gatekeeper of information. As tired as you are, and with all the hats that you are wearing, it will be your job to lead this integration back to school successfully. This is the time to pull out your best communication and leadership skills. Be thoughtful about the long-term value of developing relationships with physicians, providers, schools, caseworkers, and others. Nurture these relationships. Of course, you and your child have legal rights, but remember, these rights are moderated by people. It is always better if plans are a team decision rather than a reluctant response to a demand. Give the team the benefit of the doubt and believe that everyone is working hard and trying their best. The saying, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, requires patience and thoughtful approach by the person who is in the role of advocate, and that's you. Some individuals or advocates see this approach as giving up and feel that they are not fighting for the best outcome. And if they are not fighting for the best outcome, then they will be defeated. In fact, the advocate, who is an active and valuable part of their or their child's team, is the true leader and likely will be more successful in getting the best possible outcome. Being patient, thoughtful, and encouraging in those relationships with the people and educational providers who are often the source of frustration and bad news is a challenge, but is so critically important. Even without a pandemic, educating children with special needs has been challenging, and IEPs are routinely violated across the country. Because the system is supposed to deliver an individualized approach, yet it is only built to deliver education in a systemic way, it tends to fail our children. I believe, as many others do, that this is a civil rights issue. Returning to school and returning to adult programming is going to require an individual assessment of risk versus benefit, which will clearly look different to every individual and every family, even if that individual child looks the same as the next one on paper. And that's what makes this so hard and means that no one systemic approach will work. It costs a lot to educate our children in the system that we have. We may want to think through how we rebuild our special education system to be responsive to the educational needs of children and families. And let's actually include families' voices this time. Secretary DeVos just announced that if schools were not going to reopen, then she would hand out the money to families instead to educate their children. Well, why not? We could use it. In honor of John Lewis's passing and the 30th anniversary of the ADA, I want to lead off our discussion with my favorite quote of his, and I live my life by it. If you see something that needs to be done, do it. Now that you know more about what options are available to you, you have the beginnings to make a good choice for your family. Please know that under federal law, you always have a choice. Let's build that coalition to push our local and federal government for solutions that work for us. It is important right now that we all join together and hear everyone's voice. Children with special needs and their families are being left out of this discussion, yet we know best. I've barely touched on adult services today, but that goes doubly for them as well. This situation is too urgent to wait, but we need to be heard now. Empower family voice. We have the answers for our family. We can take control of our own futures if allowed to control the finances behind it. Empower family choice. Bring about a more efficient way to deliver programs and services. Let's develop some initiatives and pilot programs. Start some new things. This will lead us to long-term social change. If you see something that needs to be done, do it. Choice and voice. Now, let's go to our poll. Kyra?
There you go. Okay, so everyone should see on their screen a question that says, what has been or is currently your biggest concern when it comes to planning for your own or your child's education? So if you could go ahead and answer that question, we'll give everybody a few minutes to respond, and then we'll share the results with everybody. There we go. We've got about 63% of our attendees have voted. So we are gonna just wait just another couple of seconds before we close the poll out, and then we will share the results with everybody, and then we can chat about it a little bit. And I think that will go into a lot of the questions that we have that have come in. Okay, here we go. I'm going to end the poll. Is there anybody else that wants to vote? If you can raise your hand real quick and I can see that people are still voting. If not, we'll go ahead and close the poll. Okay, looks like we're all done. Okay, so now I'm going to share the results. Now everybody should see the results on their screen. Annette, do you want to just talk briefly about kind of maybe the two biggest topics? It looks like educating school personnel is a big issue. So maybe you have some advice on the best ways to educate the school community about the FEOD and on the ability to fully participate in learning and social activities.
So this is definitely more of a challenge when people go virtual with learning, for sure, because it's harder to pull together your team virtually. And did everybody get our back to school checklist in their briefcase?
Yes, the back, everyone checks your briefcase. When you go back into the conference platform, on the left-hand side, you'll see a little briefcase, and that has been pre-populated in everyone's briefcase. So yes, that is there.
Okay, so there are some tips in there and a checklist in there with some advocacy tips. And so we talk about that a little bit in there, and it talks about how you are obviously not only your child's best advocate, but you are the expert. So you need to come at this as the expert and as the team leader in bringing the team together. So you need to bring the information to the team and help them understand, you know, what the challenges are that are going to impact the learning process and what accommodations are needed. So the difference between 504 accommodations and between somebody needing to have things on an IEP are can be sometimes subtle, and most school districts are really going to push things to a 504 accommodation plan whenever possible, because you have a lot of rights under an IEP that you don't have with a 504 accommodation plan. And so they'll be looking to keep things off of an IEP when possible. The difference is, in order to get something in an IEP, it really needs to impact educational progress. And that can be hard to prove sometimes. So you will want to look at that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that is very helpful. Okay, so let's take to some of the questions that have been posed. What do you advise for legal documents that are necessary when you're dealing with an adult child?
That's really good. And I would like to point out that we're going to be doing a whole session on this on Sunday. So please come on Sunday. My husband Mark and I are doing a Sunday session. I think it's is it 10 o'clock on Sunday?
It is at 10 o'clock on Sunday. Yeah.
And then we are also doing a noon question and answer session in the lounge, so that please come and talk to us then as well. But the incapacity documents are very important, and you're gonna be looking at, if you're not considering guardianship for somebody who can make decisions on their own, you're gonna need some form of healthcare agency. So in your state, that might be called a durable power of attorney for healthcare, or a healthcare proxy document. and you're going to need some kind of HIPAA release for medical information sharing. You're going to want to have a durable power of attorney for financial decision making as well. And in some states, you're going to need some other kind of documents too, maybe some end-of-life decision making if those are important given your situation.
Perfect, that's great. And Annette, are those documents listed in that checklist, or is that something maybe we can put that list together and drop that in the briefcases so that's as a resource for everybody?
You know what? We will give you the slides.
Okay.
All of those documents are in our slides for the estate planning seminar.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, we'll make sure that those are available.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. I've got a lot of questions here, so I'm trying to. How do you plan for alternates to yourself as a parent planning for financial matters for your adult child who may not be able to manage finances due to their disability?
That is also on Sunday. So those questions are definitely all going to come up and be answered on Sunday's talk as well.
Okay, perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you for talking about schools and homeschooling. What is your opinion regarding the success of these lawsuits during a pandemic, which is a national health crisis?
I don't think they're going to be very successful. I will tell you that especially any kind of a, I don't want to be too negative, but I think any class action lawsuit is likely to fail because individualized education is just that. And the likelihood of being able to pursue a class action on behalf of individuals who are so different, it's just not gonna, it's just probably gonna fail. I think that there's likely to be some relief coming for school districts because I think the federal government's going to step in and state governments are going to step in because they're going to find that it's been an impossibility for schools to have provided education during this pandemic with being forced to be closed. I don't know how schools are going to provide education with striking teachers and with their buildings being shut down, and it's a very difficult scenario. You couldn't pay me enough money to be an administrator in a school district right now. It's what a tough position to be in. I got to tell you, at the same time, our students are the ones who are being hurt the worst because a high school student with a decent work ethic is going to be able to access education, distance learning. They're going to be able to finish school and they're probably going to do okay. Our kids, especially the more profound kids, are going to be extremely challenged to get anything out of this online learning platform. And we all know it. So they're not getting anything right now.
It's tough. So one of the questions was, if somebody has specific questions about an IEP, will you be able to support and help with some of those questions in the Q&A session on Sunday?
I can try. It depends on, what state you're in, but at least we can try to, if nothing else, get you over to a resource in your own state.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
So stop on in and we'll get you to a good resource.
Perfect. Okay, well, that is all the questions. Well, a couple of personal questions. Let me add these in that were asked at the very beginning. Someone asked what type of FAOD Elizabeth had.
Oh my God, I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. It's all good.
Yeah, and you know what? It was it was so long ago, and it wasn't our prevailing problem, to be
Right.
honest with you. It was not front and center, and it was in and amongst so many other things. And she was, it really came up when she was on TPN. It was a big issue for us when we couldn't feed her. So that was, and she was like 2.5 years old, 3 years old. So that was what I remember the most
Yeah.
about,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot on that. Thank you.
yeah.
Can you share the name of the online school that you talked about, that program that you talked
Yeah, it was K-12, and I know that they have expanded so much since we used it, and we really liked it. But again, this is not an advertisement for their program, but we really liked it. In our state, in Massachusetts, it was done through Greenfield Public School. And again, you know, we really liked it. We really liked her teacher, and we thought it was a good fit for us. But it's all about what's a good match for you and your family.
One last question. What are your recommendations in terms of preparing for a meeting with your child's school as you're trying to decide homeschool versus in person, and making sure that you have the necessary resources for your child as school comes back in the fall?
This is such a good, very important question. Let's talk about this for a minute. The first thing is have a really good attitude, okay? I know that's hard, especially since we're all so tired, aren't we? Oh my gosh. I mean, this is really tough stuff, and I can't even imagine, because, you know, I'm not going through what many of you are going through right now. My heart goes out to all of you. It really does. So trying to approach this in a collaborative way is really important. Understand that everybody is scared. So your teachers are scared right now. Your administrators are scared, and everybody has the students and the team's best interest at heart. So they all want to do the right thing. Once you figure that out, that puts everything in the right frame of mind to come up with a solution, first and foremost, okay? Then do your homework and know what you want before you sit down at that Zoom meeting, okay? If you already know what you want and you have gone through those questions that I listed, then you will be ahead of the game, because they're not going to figure it out for you. If you come to the table with that solution and your rationale, and by the way, if you want to homeschool, truly homeschool, and not do a public school distance learning program, you need to know what the homeschool rule is in your state, because some states are much more loosey-goosey than others. Massachusetts is one of only 2 states that require a homeschool actual like program. You have to sign off and give the state your curriculum, which made me really mad. And even though I had a distance learning, you know, public school program, I needed to give them a homeschool plan. And because I'm a lawyer, I gave them a really hard time about that. But so you need to know what your state law says, and every state has a homeschool support group network that you can be part of that will help you get prepared. So doing your homework, and listen, all of you, you know how to do this because you have been advocating for your kid for a really long time when it comes to the medical stuff. You just turn that around and do the same with the educational stuff. So you get all your homework in place, You come in with the right attitude, and you come in with your ready-made solution of what you know that you want, and then you lay it all out. That's my suggestion for how you get to the right point with your team.
Yes, that's really, really great. Thank you so much for that, Annette. We really appreciate, thank you for providing us such much needed information. You know, one of the stories that we've heard all the time, and so often now that we're in COVID, is that others are finally getting a glimpse into the lives of what rare disease families face each and every day. But with COVID, it's uncharted territory for us all. So we're so appreciative of the resources and recommendations that you've provided us. So just a reminder that if you'd like to hear from more Annette, she'll be presenting again on Sunday at 10 o'clock with her husband, Mark Worthington, who is also an attorney who practices with Annette. And they will also host a Q&A in the lounge on Sunday as well. So we really, really appreciate it. Our next session will be immediately following this with Ultragenics. So we're going to ask everyone to go ahead and sign off, and we'll give you a few minutes to get into the next presentation, and we will see you there. Thank you so much.
Everybody. Choice and voice.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.